welcome to the Mead Institute's webinar, Power Play, Navigating Energy Purchasing in Volatile Markets. My name is Sam Wildman, Strategic Projects Director at the Mead Institute, and I'm here to introduce today's speakers and moderate a Q&A at the end of the session for this webinar. We look forward to a great discussion today on a topic that I know is top of mind for many of our members. Hope you're ready to jump in with us. I'd like to thank Environ for being our sponsor for today's webinar. We greatly appreciate their support in bringing this topic to the Mead Institute members. APPI Energy is now operating under the Environ name and is available to provide data-driven, holistic energy management services and custom solutions tailored to your organization's specific needs and goals. As a part of your membership benefit, Environ can analyze your energy usage, evaluate your energy bill, deliver a green apples to green apples comparison of supplier prices and contracts, and help negotiate a supplier solution tailored to your budget needs. Environ is a true extension of your team, offering end-to-end sustainability services to ease the key challenges of energy cost, carbon, and efficiency. Our team considers all aspects of, Environ's team considers all aspects of your current and future energy usage to help your organization effectively set, meet, and even exceed your energy efficiency and sustainability goals. Now, I would like to introduce our speakers for today's webinar, Oliver Hode and Nick Stanziola with Environ. Oliver leads the food and beverage division within Environ and is responsible for strategy development and managing relationships within the sector. These strategies include the negotiation and management of electrical and natural gas power contracts, demand response, renewables, efficiency, project funding, and greenhouse gas inventories. Prior to joining APPI and Environ, Oliver worked at Tesla, where he developed solar and battery storage projects. Nick Stanziola is the head of energy strategy for Environ. With 15 years of natural gas, energy, and fuel oil procurement experience, Nick is an expert in fundamentals of markets, risk management, and strategic planning. Environ's energy strategy team, number one responsibility is to manage client budgets effectively and ensure optimal use of resources while maintaining financial stability. Thank you all for being with us today. Thank you, Oliver and Nick. I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Sam, and sorry for those tongue twisters, but you got through it, so thanks. Thanks everyone for joining today. Really appreciate it. Everyone jumping on, and thanks to the Mead Institute for hosting. Just a quick thing, the music, I don't know if anyone heard that at the start. The jazz reminded me of New Orleans and the ELS conference last year. All right, well, thanks for joining. We'll go ahead and get right into it. If you can move along to the next slide. High-level agenda, we're going to look at Energy Management 101, just some of the core principles of what good energy management is and some considerations. We'll look at the energy markets and map that out with the fundamentals and actually align that with a bearish, bullish, or a wild card to see what direction those fundamentals are moving. Provide you with some price points across the country, what historically the price has been, where it's at today, and what we expect it to do in the future. And then finally wrap it up with an opportunities and risk page where we'll align that with actionable items. As mentioned, we'll start with just overviewing energy management practices as a whole, starting with energy deregulation. So where can you actually procure gas and electricity, and how is the utility grid broken up? We'll go into some of the key terms, components, and units of measurement, and then again, look at some of the key considerations when managing energy. There's a lot of volatility around price right now, so anything that you can do to help influence the price or reduce your usage or find cost savings are going to be key for moving forward and helping managing your budgets appropriately into the future. So to start it off, what is energy deregulation and what does it mean? So deregulation in the United States started in the 90s, and essentially it was moving away from monopoly operated utility and generation, for example, like a Duke in North Carolina or South Carolina, over to independent third-party suppliers. And really what that gives the consumer the ability to do is procure third-party gas or electricity directly from the wholesale market instead of being at the whim of a utility that there is no supplier choice. Ultimately, what that looks like is this this map on the right hand of the screen. Everything that's in blue is deregulated for natural gas procurement. and everything striped is deregulated for electricity procurement. Texas, for some reason, stripes, but Texas is indeed a deregulated electric market. So natural gas, a lot of opportunity. Electric is predominantly the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, Texas, and California. The goal of deregulation simply was to lower price and stimulate innovation, right? If you've got all these suppliers competing for your business, the idea is the pricing is more competitive, they compete and it drops. And in order to be competitive and compete, they have to innovate constantly. That has, however, come with challenges over time. Price volatility being one, right? If you're not actively managing or have a plan or a strategy in place, you can be hit with some pretty heavy market swings. So volatility, can be a real issue in these markets. Reliability, we'll touch on this, but reliability is a major concern right now, particularly within PJM, which is an ISO, and MISO. There's a lot of demand coming online and a lot of generation that's coming off of line. So when you look at simple supply and demand economics, we're in a bit of a pinch, and we'll get into that a little bit. And finally, market manipulation. Most people, I think, would be familiar with Enron in the early 2000s. They did some pretty bad things and manipulated markets and so forth. So there is concerns around that, but I think that's really something that's been in the past. But if you haven't seen it, my plug here is you should watch The Smartest Men in the Room. It's a documentary about Enron. Fantastic, representation of what happened and what transpired. But I think I'll end with they're not smartest men in the room, because most of them ended up in jail or aren't with us any longer. But highly recommend watching that. It sort of sums up how deregulation started. So we have, right, the deregulated energy states itself, and then as a country as a whole, or including Canada, we have something called an ISO, which is an independent system operator. And the ISO is responsible for managing and balancing the grid's energy supply and demand, so making sure that there's power available, and then furthermore, administering the wholesale electric market. So typically when you're procuring gas or electricity you're buying it from this particular ISO. Yes, it does break down to the independent utilities within the ISOs, but it's largely the prices are indicated through the ISO. Furthermore, as I mentioned with reliability, hopefully folks on the call today are familiar with some of the capacity changes if you are within PJM or MISO. But there is tremendous reliability concerns, particularly for this upcoming year, which will be June 25 through June 26, around the power availability for PJM. And essentially what the ISO has to do to balance the demand is increase capacity costs. So they're incentivizing generators to generate more energy. So the cost in PJM, and I think in that orange, within that orange zone, is going to experience about a 20 to 25% cost increase starting in June, so invoiced in July. So major issues around that within PJM, as well as MISO. Nick, do you know the increases in MISO? I don't know what they are. I know it was fairly new, but I think fairly substantial impacts as well as PJM.
Yes, quite similar to PJM. You're going to be in that 15 to 20 to 25% range. And like you mentioned, that begins on June 1st of this year, so just a little less than 2 weeks away.
Cool, thanks. So yeah, I mean, overall message there is if you're not aware of these changes in capacity in MISO and PJM, reach out to whoever you're working with, or we can help support you, just so you can have budgets and expectations updated, whether it's yourself or through your financial team. Furthermore, right, that you have your ISO, and then you break down to your utility. The utility owns the local power distribution, the poles and the lines and so forth. So that's who you're buying your direct delivery from. However, when you procure third-party supply, that supply section shifts to a supplier rather than being on a default service. Nick, anything you want to touch on this before we move on?
No, I think that that everything that you touched on is perfect.
All right, great. Next slide, please. So when we actually look at the costs and the units of measurements and components within, it breaks down into a few different ways. I think on the electricity side, it's really important to recognize that there's 2 units of measurements that you're billed upon. So you have a kilowatt hour. That's what most of us are familiar with. So at the end of the month, they say you've used whatever, 1,000 kilowatt hours. It's a usage-based charge. That's typically what we're all familiar with, right? You have a price for kWh and you pay that, and you look at your usage, how much did I use? Important. Well, maybe not just, but as important maybe is the kWh, which is a demand-based charge. So demand is typically measured in a 15-minute interval, but it's the amount of energy that the facility or plant is pulling at any given moment. So instead of over time, it's how much does it need at that one moment. And there's charges that are related to kW, like your delivery charges through the utility. Typically, those are based on demand, as well as your capacity and your transmission tags. So, extremely important to understand the differences in how you're billed and how you can attack, reduce, or control, influence those individual costs. kWh, right? You're looking at lowering your consumption, right? How much can we lower over a given month? kWh, you're trying to lower your peaks, right? So your peak demand, you're trying to pull it down and flatten that out. So it's very important to separate those out. And finally, there's something called a peak load contribution tag, which is a part of your demand-based tags and your capacity. Those are established over, in PJM, for example, 5 days. So they take the 5 hottest days of the summer, right, and say how much energy do you use between 4 and 6 p.m. Those days change. It just depends on when the grid's peaking. But if you can identify those days and potentially lower your usage, all of your charges that are tied to your peak load contribution for the following year are going to be reduced. Something not heavily focused on really in the past that much, but due to the increases in capacity that we've seen this year and moving forward, something that should be considered in an energy strategy. Finally, price components for electricity. There's all these things that make up your overall cost, right? There's the energy piece itself, the generation, the power, and you have capacity, transmission, RPS, renewable portfolio standards, and other, which is typically like ancillary line losses. But message here is, right, is there's a lot of different components that go into that overall price. Some things can be fixed, or all things can be fixed or locked in. Some things should be passed through. So how you manage each of those components, depends on the market and what's present in the market, I should say. As it relates to natural gas, a little more simple. You have NYMEX and basis. So NYMEX is the national cost of gas. It's NYMEX is Henry Hub. So Henry Hub is the largest natural gas exchange in the world. It's in Louisiana, and it manages the interstate pipelines for gas. So nationally, there's a NYMEX price for gas. Basis is the cost differential for delivery, right? So what does it cost to get the gas from the hub to your regional delivery point? And we'll look at some of those price points again, as we move on through. But as it relates to basis, to natural gas, basis is something that you would lock longer term, and then NYMEX would be a position that you could hedge strategically over time. Nick, again, I'll invite you to make any comments here.
Yeah, one thing that I think I would comment on is circling back on the electricity side of things, regarding the kilowatt being a demand-based charge. Just to add a little bit of color to that, that truly is the future of cost reduction in terms of electricity spend. When you're reducing your demand-based charges or your demand-based tags, not only are you reducing your cost on the supply side of things, but you're also reducing cost on the transmission or the delivery side of things from the utility. I was actually doing a study this morning for a client that is involved in a demand response program, and demand response meaning they have elected to curtail or reduce volume during peak periods. And we did a study from one summer to the next and what that implication was and what the impacts were. And essentially, what had happened was that during their curtailment, they reduced their capacity and transmission tags by about 3 times, or essentially almost by 3/4. It in turn saved nearly $250,000 per year in cost, just by curtailing for 5 hours, 1 hour per day over that 5 day period. So just to give you a feel on how impactful curtailing or being aware of the demand charges, being aware of peak periods can truly be pretty substantial opportunity.
And I know, Nick, you're going to take this slide, but just to hammer down that fast point or that last point, alignment, right? Like when you're looking at demand and usage-based charges, depending on who you are, right, that might mean something different. So alignment's really important as it relates to that because, if you're looking at demand and reducing or pulling down some of the peaks, you're going to need facilities involved. It's not just a financial decision, it's an operational decision as well. So alignment is one of our foundational principles, and that's why it's so important. All of these things are interconnected.
Thank you. So to start, when it comes to building your energy strategy, you should always consider these foundational principles here on the top: alignment, aggregation, as well as analytics. To me, alignment should always be first. When it comes to creating a strategy, we always advocate to have an energy team or a group of individuals that are in charge of decision making within the facility. Your finance group, their goals are going to be a lot different than your supply chain group. Your facilities team is also going to have a lot of different goals than your finance team as well. So having a set group of individuals within each of those groups or whatever group that you feel is appropriate is important when it comes to decision making, so that all voices can be heard, so that all goals can be met. Very, very important, and it's really something that it should be focused on as you continue forward through your energy journey. When it comes to aggregation, the idea behind that is the more volume, the more facilities you are looking to purchase for, provides you more purchasing power. The larger volume, at the end of the day, is more attractive to your third-party suppliers. They will come in more competitive based on volume, length of term. So aggregating is important, but I believe even more important than that is making decisions based on analytics. Right now, the energy market is so volatile and tremendously unpredictable. But what we can say is that there are analytics that are available and that we will provide and that we can provide to our customers to make educated decisions. The last thing that you want to be doing in terms of energy purchasing is making a last-minute decision or a decision without any education behind it. So something that's important that the energy strategy team here does in Environ is we spend a lot of time educating our customers, using our analytics, using our data, and we like to share that with all the group. We'll get a little bit into that, and we'll have a little flavor of that in a few slides moving forward. But just remember these foundational principles when it comes to your strategy as you move forward. Truly, the energy procurement strategy. Oh, sorry, we jumped a little too early. There's one thing, thank you, that I don't want to touch on was the procurement strategy that's designed to do a couple of different things. It is important to have your budget predictability, but it also is important to understand what your risk tolerance is. Some folks want to make sure that their budget is locked and secure and they know in advance ahead of a fiscal year, sometimes even 2 fiscal years ahead. Some folks have a little bit of more, risk tolerance, and so they're more interested in allowing their volume to float, whether it's electric or gas on the market. So having that designed or having that strategy in place in advance is tremendously important. We always try to also reduce market and supplier risk. It's important if you're going to be in a third-party supply agreement to make sure that you're working with a national reputable supplier, somebody that can handle your true load, right? And handle the risk that comes with the energy strategy and the energy purchasing. So making sure that you're with a financially stable supplier as well. There are a handful of national suppliers that are very viable. There's also a handful of regional suppliers that you may want not to consider for that reason. And then, of course, it's always important to limit your risk premiums. That's something when it comes to your product strategy, and always be sure to avoid attempting to time the market or becoming price takers. It's nearly impossible to perfectly time the market. So you always want to try to avoid that. So thank you. We can go to the next slide.
Yeah, and just one point there on the supplier, creditworthiness. There's big issues several years ago when the market peaked out with suppliers that were over-indexed on the wholesale market and actually went out of business. And a lot of their client base, was kicked back to a default service. So ensuring that you're with the appropriate supplier is super important. All right, so demand management response, right? We've kind of talked about this a little bit throughout. Very, very important as we move forward in the future, especially around the updated charges around demand and capacity. Most people, I feel anyways, think of it as demand response and demand management kind of grouped into one. And it's important to separate them out because there's two completely different things. So demand response, right, is kind of that story that Nick alluded to at the start. Demand response, people are going to pay you to curtail your usage, right? So in the middle of the summer, they say, hey, the grid's peaking out, and the utility calls on you to turn off, whatever you've committed to, and they'll pay you for it. Those payments have increased substantially over the last couple of years. So if you've evaluated demand response perhaps 2-3 years ago, highly recommend looking at it again because those financial incentives have increased. Typically the way to engage or to kick that off is to do a load study, and this is why it's important to have alignment with facilities and and accounting or finance, because you got to figure out what you can shut down. Some lines you can't shut down, you just can't, right? You can't. Others you might be able to say, yeah, we could close this down for an hour or two if we needed to. So figuring out your capability is the first step. Your second is figuring out if the incentive is worth the squeeze. That's demand response. Demand management is very much managing your demand, kind of what we talked about earlier, those peaks, lowering your peaks, or identifying those days that Nick mentioned in the summer and curtailing your usage. So for the subsequent year, your charges are less. Demand management is going to be cost reductions from the way you're billed, but there aren't financial incentives paid to you. So two differences, but ultimately everyone benefits. It's kind of a win for everyone. Consumer has lower price points, utility alleviate brownouts or grid reliability constraints, and then it's also good for the environment. So it's a win all the way around. Energy audits, right? So one thing you can do is try and buy energy for less, but the cheapest kWh is a kWh not used. So how do you identify energy conservation measures? Well, your facilities team might be pretty good at that, but often a second set of eyes can be fairly impactful. So an energy audit simply is evaluating your electrical infrastructure and systems. Typically, it's not focused on your process equipment. So within meat processing, we're looking at boilers, chillers, steam, compressed air, building envelope, and controls. The lowest hanging fruit from what we find is typically, looking at your steam and compressed air systems. Steam traps are typically faulty. So not only does it, mean you're having to create more steam, but it can also put condensation into the equipment, which then degrades the life expectancy. Compressed air, if you haven't done a compressed air leak study in the last couple of years, you're going to be leaking some air somewhere. It's just kind of how it works. These sort of things, there's utility programs and payments to help pay for this. So if the utility will pay for the study as long as you fix it. So again, very low hanging fruit, a lot of cost benefits to conducting an energy study. And typically it ends in a report with projects that are prioritized based off of whatever criteria is most important to your organization, whether it's ROI, greenhouse gas reduction, or supply chain compliance or something like that. ASHRAE defines it in 3 levels. And essentially it's just more and more complex as you work down. So level 1 is pretty basic, walk through essentially. Level 2 goes into a bit more detail, and then level 3 is very complex. It might be your end of use or end of life boiler replacement for electrification, life cycle analysis. So most of the stuff I think can be probably identified through a level 1 or 2. And energy audits, for the most part, can be done for little or no cost. So there's not much to lose, but a lot to gain, particularly when price points are increasing. Energy conservation measures are going to be ever so important moving forward into the future.
Can I make a quick PSA?
Yeah, please.
All right, great. So for anyone on the call or anyone that might be watching the recording in the future, something to keep in mind is that if you will be, or if you are going to be doing any sort of energy audits, any sort of efficiency work, and you are working with a third-party supplier, it is important to relay that information to them or the consultant that you might be working with, because you do not want to be in a situation where you are over forecasted if you're reducing usage. There can be some penalties that come along with that. So it's always important to relay that information to whoever you may be working with, just to make sure that all your T's are crossed, all your I's are dotted, and that into the future you can reduce any sort of penalties for over forecasting.
Yeah, great. We can move on to the next slide. But yeah, that's a great point, right? And the term that Nick's referring to is MAC language, material adverse change, right? So if a facility makes a material change to the way that you use energy, i.e., you replace a boiler or you swap out all your lights and your usage drop, the supplier can potentially ding you for that. So yeah, just keeping everyone in the loop is extremely important. Emissions, if you're looking at energy conservation measures or compliance or so forth, emissions are probably going to be fairly important. Scope 1, right, is a direct emission on site, natural gas, nitrogen use, refrigerants. Scope 2 is indirect, typically just electricity, although it can be steam and heat. Scope 3, indirect, supply chain. There's Scope 3 has kind of been pushed off a little bit with all the different challenges that come along with it. But if you're selling it to like a Walmart, right, or a major retailer, the reason that they may be requesting Scope 1 or Scope 2, in terms of a survey from you, is because they're trying to quantify their Scope 3. And in order to do that, they need their scope, the producer, the packer's Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. What is an emissions factor? An emissions factor is a coefficient that essentially converts everything to a carbon equivalent. So, natural gas has a carbon equivalent, diesel has a carbon equivalent, and so forth. The one point I want to make here is a kWh to a kWh emission can be completely different, right? If you have a kWh being produced in Maine and it's hydro, or you've got a kWh of energy being produced in Kentucky and it's coal, right? That emissions conversion is going to be completely different. You're going to have a much higher emissions in Kentucky as you would in Maine. So just understanding that and how you can actually reduce your emissions based off of your fuel mix or fuel stack is super important. Next slide, please. Community solar. So we're not going to talk about solar as in installing solar on your roof, because I think everyone's fairly familiar with all that. But community solar is something that has been emerging over the last sort of 5-10 years, and it's gained tremendous traction, and there's a ton of value in it. It's very regional specific, right? So the map there outlines, where there's good opportunity or limited opportunity with some potential hurdles. But essentially, community solar is an aggregated development program that links organizations and ties you to the project. You can't claim any of the renewable energy credits or the emission reduction attributes that come along with solar. What you can claim is the cost reduction that they're going to give you. Typically, it's a 5 to 10% cost reduction off your utility costs, dependent on the load you have allocated. There is a term commitment. It's kind of just a win, honestly. It's one of those situations where it's like, if you give me $5, I'll give you $10 back. And it doesn't really make sense how you're doing it, but there's a lot of money to be had and saved or avoided because of it. And we're all paying into this, right? All these funds to develop these projects, or a lot of them, not all of them, come from RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standards. So as we're all paying into these RPS standards in a state, this money is then allocated to different development projects. So you're paying into it, you're paying for it already. You might as well actually receive the kickback and sign up for some of these programs. 3 types of off-takers. Typically, there's an anchor, which is going to take a large portion of the load, and the developer wants to secure that before they develop the project. And then the rest is filled with small or residential meters. But again, look into that. If you have an facility in any of these states, highly recommend exploring what's available, because it can be 5 to 10% off of the total budget.
Hey, Oliver, I have a question, if I can jump in for you.
Yeah.
Those states with the dashed line for limited opportunity, there's a lot of packer processor representation in those states. Can you speak a little bit to what the factors are or drivers are in limiting that opportunity?
Yeah, so these projects fill up and ebb and flow all the time, right? So if we're talking about it today, there might be an anchor and some small, classes available today, but then in a week they're all gone. There's also some parameters around the billing and how it's like a rebate, right? You pay $9 to get $10 back on your next bill. So how the billing works in some of these states, there's some nuances that make it a little bit more technical or challenging, hurdles that you have to overcome in terms of like an accounts payable standpoint. But they all differ from state to state and also utility to utility. So there might be, great incentives in California in one utility and not the next. Whereas you take Illinois, and whether you're Ameren or ComEd, there's fantastic opportunity. It's simple. It's 10% almost off of your total budget. So state and utility is slightly different, but again, if you talk to whoever you're working with currently for energy purchasing or us, we're happy to guide you in the appropriate direction and let you know what the opportunity is.
Thanks, Oliver. Appreciate that.
Yep, sure. Yep. Next slide. Building performance, I'm just going to spend 30 seconds here. So these are popping up all over the place. And essentially building performance standards are, standards to reduce energy efficiency or emissions. Typically they're getting implemented and there's a benchmarking period where they're asking you to just benchmark data. They're trying to learn, gather data. There's a compliance period. You have a year or two to comply, get everything logged in. And then if you haven't done it by the end of the compliance period, enforcement, you're getting fined. So there is a cost to avoid in doing these emission reductions, not just from a feel good or a cost or a whatever standpoint you're trying to do it, but later on down the line there'll be consequences if you don't actually hit these building performance standards. Some states are going all in, and it's a statewide performance. You can see them on the right side, and then there's also city programs that are going to be implemented. So be aware of what's in the pipeline for the state or city that you operate in, and then understand the compliance, enforcements, and benchmarking phase and how long you have to actually get all that data logged. Next slide. All right, so we're going to now pivot to sort of the market fundamentals. And we can jump into the next slide here right off the bat. So what we've done here, again, I'm going to hand it over to Nick, but just talking about some of the key market drivers that we're looking at, and then pairing them with, with where bullish or bearish, which direction it's pushing the market. With that, hand it over to you, Nick.
Okay. We are a little bit up against the clock here, aren't we? So I will try to work as efficiently as possible, but just to touch on a few of the items that are currently driving both the natural gas and the electric market are here. And there's a couple of things that we wanted to point on today. First and foremost, excuse me, is that the United States is no longer just a national market for gas. It's now a worldwide market for gas, global. And the reason why is because the United States is now officially the largest exporter of liquefied natural gas around the world. We're currently exporting about 16 BCF per day, which is quite a bit of gas. Majority of that's going overseas to Europe and also into Asia. If you recall, in early 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the European Union put heavy sanctions against Russia and essentially no longer allowed the Russian fuel, whether it was natural gas or oil, to make its way through the pipelines into Europe. And with that, the United States and a couple other countries had to really shoulder that load and be responsible for providing Europe and Asia with the appropriate amount of gas that they need. LNG is quite lucrative when it comes to our markets and selling. So just as an example, currently we could sell liquefied natural gas overseas at about $13 to $14 per decatherm, where it's trading here in the United States at about $3.50 currently. So the incentive continues to stay and continues to rise for the LNG exports to continue to make their way overseas. And why is that important? Is because it affects our underground storage here, gas that's available in the United States. For a long time, our natural gas storage was in great shape. When 2022 hit, our natural gas storage went down to a historical low of below the 5-year average, and costs were incredibly high. As we made our way through 23 and 24, we regained some traction. But as you all may recall, this winter actually was pretty cold. It was one of the colder winters that we've had in the last 10 years. I believe it was the coldest January that we've had since 2014. And that impacted our natural gas storage tremendously. That's important because essentially throughout the country, in order to generate electricity, we use about 45% of our fuel comes from natural gas. So as the natural gas market goes, the electricity market follows right along with it. So another thing that's happening right now, and it's happening across the country, is the growth of data centers. Data centers are tremendously large gas and electric users. It's incredible. They use more than large universities, large hospital healthcare systems on a regular basis. And they're looking, and I believe I read that they will be tripling data center usage in terms of facilities by 2027. And so that's a big deal because when more gas is being needed to generate the electricity to keep those data centers going, that means there's less gas available for the rest of us. It's going to make sure, and it's going to put a lot of a lot of pressure on production. It's going to put a lot of pressure on our underground storage. So just again, something to keep in mind. And then when it comes to near-term market fundamentals and near-term pressures, weather plays a really big part into the day-to-day price volatility. Currently, we're in what's called the shoulder season, where there's not a lot of heat needed or gas needed for heat. There's also not a lot of electricity needed for cooling. And so when you have that weather pattern, it allows our storage to replenish itself. So the shoulder season is always important. That's the spring and the fall. Last but not least, something important is always to pay attention to is geopolitical issues, news, anything that's happening out in the world. Right now, what we're paying attention to and what is most focused on currently is any additional events or conflicts related to Russia and Ukraine or anything that's happening in the Middle East. When there was the Israel and Hamas conflict, that did not have a massive impact on the market because that's just not a large using region, and they do not produce gas or oil for anyone there either. So again, it's just being sure that you're staying on top of the news, paying attention, and that's something that we always try to educate our clients with. We can go on to the next. For the sake of time, we can skip this one too. This one was just slightly touching on demand growth, but I think that we touched on that enough there.
I want to make one point there, Nick, which is just kind of puts it all into perspective. 3 Mile Island was the nuclear facility that got retired several years ago in Pennsylvania, just to show the pure demand growth for these AI centers. Microsoft is refiring that nuclear facility and taking 100% of the load. It's carbonless, so it's great for them. They want carbonless energy, but just to pure magnitude, right? This is one company is taking all the energy from a nuclear power plant. And that's it. That's the point I wanted to make.
Yeah, it's a perfect point. It's a great point. And I believe personally that we're going to see these nuclear plants become unretired or be incentivized to stay on longer. Of course, if there is an issue, we understand how catastrophic that could be. But at the end of the day, there have not really been that many issues with nuclear, and I think that folks are opening their eyes back to it. Okay, so the graphic here represents our liquefied natural gas export capabilities and then what's coming online into the future. The key takeaway here is making your way to 26 through 27 and 28. Everything in gray on the bottom of the graphic is export capacity and facilities that are running and they're online. We're currently exporting about that 15 BCF per day as we've pushed into 2025. But by the time we get to 2027 and 2028, our exports are going to be set to nearly double. And again, that's going to put pressure on production. It's going to put pressure on our storage, and it's very likely to put pressure on our natural gas costs as we make our way forward. It's very important to stay ahead of the market, and this is just a perfect example of what type of impacts can happen. You may not think that this is important in 2028, but the market's already reacting to that. So keep this in mind. This is a great visualization on how important liquefied natural gas is to the United States economy. Okay, So super quick, this is just a LNG export price comparison. And so the black line on the bottom is our United States NYMEX Henry Hub. And you can see that from March 2024 to about May 2025, our costs were averaging about somewhere between $3 and $4 per decatherm. And during those times, so if we look at the TTF specifically in Europe, it's the blue line. Costs were they were selling gas between $10 and $15 per decatherm. So very influential, very heavy incentive for the LNG facilities to continue to push as much gas out as possible and stay at maximum capacity.
Yeah, Nick, remember I asked you how far back can you get this chart? If you were to go back to 22 and we hit $9 gas here in the US, TTF hub, which in Europe was trading at $90. So
Yes.
$90 gas in Europe during that hike compared to $9 where we are. Obviously it's way down, right? You can see that now, but just that's the real incentive, right? You get it somewhere else, you can charge substantially more. Why would you not want to do it if you could? So it's just more gas going overseas, taking it away from our potential power generation and end use, which in turn pushes up the market price.
I got my gas bill yesterday for my house. It was ridiculous. I couldn't believe it. And I could only imagine what a $90 per decatherm gas bill looks like. Just incredible. Um, very, very interesting time was during 2022, but good point though. Very volatile. Okay, so this is our natural gas storage review and what the impact has on the natural gas market. So the key takeaway here on the left-hand side is if we take a look at the light blue line, is that we are now coming back up slightly above the 5-year average. When we're at the 5-year average, costs tend to be pretty calm. And if we take a look at the right, what this is looking at, the dark blue line represents the Henry Hub spot price, what has settled and what's trading into the future. And then the little gray lines represent our storage. So if we take a look and we focus first at 2022, this is the Russia and Ukraine conflict. And this is when we started exporting quite a bit of gas overseas. We were in a deficit of gas for that 2022 frame. And you could see that costs for natural gas were trading anywhere between 8, 9, sometimes even higher than that. And then when 2023 occurred, and even into 2024, two things happened. We had no real measurable winter in 2023. It was very mild. And then a few of our export facilities went down in the summer for maintenance. And then that coupled right onto January 2024, where we had another mild winter across the country. And so you could see that our storage, the gray lines, were well above average, and the gas market came down quite a bit. If you push your way forward, the EIA is expecting the United States to be underneath the 5-year average in storage from 2026 pushing forward. And those costs are trading at about $4 to $5 per decatherm currently. And so that's a pretty impactful visual on how volatile the market can be and also how important our storage levels are on a week-to-week basis. Really quick, when it comes to seasonal weather, we always like to see what the National Weather Service is predicting. And right now, the key takeaway for any folks on here is that it's going to be a pretty normal summer. The only difference is that there is an assumption that there's going to be a few less named storms this season, and there should be a few less hurricanes. That's the prediction that we're receiving from NOAA, National Weather Service, and also a few suppliers that we touch base with on weather as well. Should be pretty hot on the West Coast. That's a good thing. There's a lot of solar out there. So a lot of solar generated electric generation. So that'll be good for the West Coast. But in a very congested area on the East Coast and in New England, a hot summer will likely lead to quite high pricing. Okay, so this is a quick overlay of what the natural gas market in the Midwest looks like when you also compare it to the electric market. And the dark blue represents the natural gas market. The lighter blue or that green represents the electric market. And you can see the correlation between the two markets. When the natural gas market rides high, the electric market rides right along with it. When we have drops in gas, electric pricing goes right along with it as well. And this is a look at the PJM fuel mix on the right-hand side. And so you could see here represented the light blue is about, we can call that about 35-40% is fueled by gas. And the remainder or majority is fueled by nuclear. Over time, the expectation is that solar and wind will increase, while you have coal should be decreasing by quite a bit. The more green energy you have in the mix, the more expensive your energy will be. The cost to generate and maintain greener facilities or renewable facilities is a lot more expensive than maintaining a coal plant or a natural gas plant. All right, so here are some of the analytics that we were talking about earlier. This is a snapshot of the Henry Hub, our natural gas, essentially our pricing pipeline here for the US. When we take a look at the left-hand side, everything in blue are costs that have already settled. You could see the big jump there in 2022. That's the Russia and, excuse me, that is the Russia and Ukraine conflict. But outside of that, costs have been averaging right around $3.30 if you take a look at the black line there. And if you take a look at the gray bars, those represent wintertime. So it's December, January, February. And as you make your way forward in the orange, there's two things to point out. Well, first is that winter 2026 is currently trading at about $5 per decatherm. But as you make your way out, the pricing, the forward curves are actually backward dated, meaning the farther you go out into the future, the lower the costs are. And that could be represented here on the right-hand side. So if we take a look at the Henry Hub trading distribution for 2028 as an example, what might look like a solid blue line is actually little circles. Each one of those circles represents a trading day over the last 36 months. So every single day that there was a trade is represented on that line. The red diamond represents where pricing was as of the 12th when I started generating some of these visuals. And the farther left you are on that line, the lower your price, the farther right, the higher. And so if we make our way down to the bottom, what this is telling us here is that on May 12th, the Henry Hub was trading for 2028 at $3.73. That was better than 69% of the pricing that we've seen, or the prices that we've seen over the last 3 years. These analytical tools that we have and we use, the key takeaway here is that when we see any percentages that are 70% and above, that's signaling to us that this is a buying signal. And so we use this tool very regularly. It's a great way to gauge the history of the market and how things are going. So you have 2026, that's been pretty expensive. 2027 costs are coming down, and 2028 is in a really good spot to be purchasing. If we push this out to 29 and 30, the numbers are closer to 80%, better than 80% of what we've seen. We can go to the next slide there. Go ahead.
Let me just make one point here, Nick, and I think we could probably jump through some of these. And we can even stay on this slide as the example. When you look at the actual years and how they're trading, right? 26, 27, 28. We look at the bottom right hand of the screen here. 28 is 83% better. 26 is 35% better. When you're buying a fixed price for energy, they're including all of that in one snapshot, right? You're buying for all of those years at once. So technically you're buying 26, only 35% of the time better than all trades over the last 3 years. That's fine. But if you take a layered hedging approach and you're actually looking at these each individual calendar years and taking hedges over time and fulfilling the load, you can be very selective for how you're buying. And by doing that, you can substantially reduce your cost instead of just taking one price at one day. Essentially you're saying that's the best market price that we're going to take. When in actual fact, looking at this, we know that you should be separating them out and buying for different years and different times.
That's a great point.
Nick, if you want to just, we could probably fly through some of these and then move to the opportunity and risk.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Because this is really is just a couple of we just tried to pinpoint a couple of the areas that a lot of the folks are in. The all the data or all the fundamental ideas behind these slides are all the same. So when we share them with the group, they can go through at their leisure and see. So yes, we could skip down to the next slide there. Oh well, that's nice. I mean, if you're in MISO, if you're in Illinois, take a look at that. 2027 and 2028, essentially the lowest pricing has been in the last 3 years. That's
Yeah,
nice. Okay, we can keep
and
going.
yeah, that's why, I mean, we get excited about seeing some of these things. I mean, this is why separating it out and hedging it and actually having a strategy that's not a fixed price, you can really win, right? 95% better, that you want to lock that up. But you want to lock up 26 currently? Probably not. So
Probably
just a
not.
diversified approach really helps. Yeah, in the effort of time here, if we just scoot to the last, yep, there we go, and then we can open up for Q&A. So just very quick, going to run down here and align it with an action item. So layered hedging, it's kind of what we've just been talking to. Like next time you're evaluating your procurement strategy, take an alternate approach or just ask for an alternate approach, right? So you can not just look at a fixed price, but actually break it down so you can see how that would work if you're hedging over time. Energy audits, if you haven't done one, do one, right? It's little to no cost to have one conducted, and you can find some serious energy conservation measures. And then that'll help influence the energy technologies or electrification. And if not, that would make sense. Demand management response with the updates in PJM and MISO, start looking at your demand management strategy and pull in your facilities team because they'll need to be involved. It's not just going to be finance or an operations side. Demand response, see what your capabilities are. Your facilities team might say, we can't shut off anything. It's off the table. Or they might say, yeah, we could do this. And then it's a question of how much is the revenue you can generate. Funding and grants programs, be aware of what's available, not just from a federal standpoint, but state and also utility. Community solar, again, 10% cost reduction. Figure out if there's any development projects in your area and figure out, what that cost avoidance could potentially be. AI, AI is crazy. I've started implementing it all the time in my day-to-day. This is very important in terms of data management, reporting, bill pay, interval data, like the way we're managing data nowadays, specifically around either compliance or reporting or strategical decision making based off data. AI becomes very important. Shifting to the risk side, Nick, do you want to take these, or do you want me to keep hammering through?
Yeah, why don't you keep going? You're flowing great.
All right. Growing electricity demand, retirement of generation, natural gas transition fuel, all of this really points to one thing: diversification, right? Find energy conservation measures. These are all things that are going to drive the price of electricity and gas higher. So, reducing what you're using or diversifying is very important. Extreme weather, have redundancy plans in place. You don't want to be stuck with no power if it's super important. GHG, carbon compliance, be aware, right, of the potential building performance standards that are in the pipeline for you, or potential supplier questionnaires, right? They might want you to be in compliance for a particular carbon reduction by X, and if you're not doing it, you might be out the door, or you can use it as a competitive advantage, to gain some traction in a space. With that, we'll end it there, I think, just so if there's questions, we can allow for 5 minutes.
Great. Well, thank you, Nick, Oliver. Thank you both for your expertise and your insight. Great presentation. Look forward to going deeper into some of those slides in the recording in a couple of days when that recording hits my inbox. I don't see any questions in the chat or the Q&A. So now's your chance, audience. If you have questions, please bring those to us. I have a couple of thoughts as well as a question for you all that I'll throw out there, and you take it however you want to tackle it. One of the things that I'm taking from this as a takeaway, and I know I spend a lot of my time in sustainability and continuous improvement, especially on the environment side, and sustainability gets a bad rap, but one of the things that is really sitting with me today is that the best sustainability strategy isn't actually a sustainability strategy, but it's a business strategy with sustainability attributes. And I think that hits squarely on the head of the nail that you guys presented here today. But I'm curious, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. So that list of risks and opportunities, Oliver and Nick, we have a wide range of member organizations and stakeholders and demographics and types in our membership. For smaller packers and processors that don't necessarily have in-house expertise, an energy team, energy experts, where should they start? Where do you get started with that list?
Yeah, great question. Well, really, right? You got to tap into resources you have available. The Meat Institute pushes forth so many resources. Selfish plug, Environ being one of them, right? If you need help or support, we're here to help you. Where we would start, or I would recommend starting, particularly, if you're in MISO or PJM, would be look at your demand management, demand response. If you've ever evaluated it in the past, check it out again, because those payments have increased substantially. And second, you got to control what you can control. You can't control the market, right? The market is in some states double, right, the price where it was several years ago. We can't control that. We can try and make smart strategic decisions based off data. So I'd recommend making those decisions based off data. But then two, what can you control? Well, you can control potentially energy conservation measures of the way your plant's using energy. So looking at an energy audit to reduce the amount of energy you're using as a whole is something that you can influence. You can control it. And ultimately that's going to lower your price point. So I would say as a starting point, just think about what you can control and what's available, because there's some large incentives to help you execute on some of these, especially around energy conservation, right? The grants and rebates, the IRA. Pennsylvania just announced the PA RISE program, $400 million for industrial decarbonization. So just that would be my response, Nick.
Nope, you stole my answer there. I was going to say, one of the most important steps is right now it's efficiency work, and making sure that there's homework being done and you understand what those incentives and what those state rebates could look like. There's many cases where, half to 3/4 of the costs of these projects can be funded by the state.
Awesome, thank you. We have just a couple minutes. We did get a question, so I'm going to throw it out there to you, and we'll take it quickly, and then we'll pivot to close. So the question that came in: what is the potential impact of implementing electricity management, and how would it affect monetization through GHG emissions?
So go ahead, Oliver. Sorry.
Now, I mean, if I'm understanding it's correct, it's if you're putting in energy conservation measures, how would that impact emissions?
I believe so, yes.
I think I'm understanding that in the right way. I apologize if I'm not. Yeah, so if you're looking at energy conservation measures, you have to again look at what your fuel mix is, because you might be operating off of a nuclear facility or hydro, where your actual emission is very low, right, next to nothing. So you might be implementing energy conservation measures, which yes, you're going to have a reduction of energy and a reduction of cost, but it has very little impact for your actual emissions, carbon reduction. Whereas if you're somewhere else that has a very dirty fuel mix or fuel stack, right, that emissions reduction can be substantial compared to the other states. So it completely depends on the fuel mix, and a lot of that, there's a great resource, it's eGrid, and it tells you what your fuel mix is from territory to territory. So that's how that interplay is. So again, not all energy conservation measures or reductions are going to be the same emissions reduction, because a lot of that has to do with the fuel mix and the CO2 coefficient.
Great, thank you so much for that answer, Oliver. Let's go to our closing slide, please. Want to say thank you to Oliver and Nick for sharing their expertise and insights with us today. Thank you, Environ, for sponsoring today's session, this great educational opportunity. Thank you to the audience for joining us. There are more opportunities coming up soon, and you can learn more about those upcoming Meat Institute events by going to our website or accessing it through this QR code on the screen here. Again, we recorded the call. The recording link and slides will be coming to you through that registration link here in a couple of days. Thank you to everyone for attending. Have a great week, and we hope to see you soon.